I'm Sheila. I'm from Sadie. You'll look on your table, you'll see a thing like this. It's made of paper. Do you know what paper is? Do you remember? Do you all have one of those? If you don't, oh look, I can walk around. Here you go. There's for you. Anybody else? Okay, so while I'm handing it out, I'm going to explain that I've set a challenge for us. And the challenge is our context, because our context is important. Because when we design online learning, when we lose the sound, no? When we design online learning, as much as in a face-to-face situation, maybe even more so, we have to think of context. In this room, we've got people face-to-face. I'm face-to-face with you, but we also have people live streaming. And so I've issued myself with a challenge, which is to see the extent to which I can take account of that context and include everyone. Okay. I want to begin. Oh, I need to first work out how to move this thing. I want to begin with a riddle. It's a bad riddle. It's no surprise. My children always complain. So it's a gift or a present. More presents, 3 presents to support students' learning. Social presence, teacher presence, cognitive presence. So they're not presents, they're presences. Okay. So I've spoken about our context, and our context is in this room, and it's a virtual context in the live stream. And so our challenge, and I won't say my challenge, our challenge is to create all 3 presences in both contexts in this conference workshop. But you have a challenge too, to think about how might that work in your context. What are you learning here? How can you apply what you learn? What will you do differently from what you experience in this workshop? So hopefully you'll learn from me, but I'll also learn from you. Because my challenge is to include everyone, and if I don't quite succeed, I'll reflect on that and how can I do it differently next time. So what are we trying to achieve in this workshop? We want to explore the meaning of social, teacher, and cognitive presence, or build on what you already know. We want to examine the role of the teacher and learners in contributing to the 3 presences. So that makes us think about everybody's role, not just the teacher's role. We want to practice the skills of summarizing and weaving as part of creating these 3 presences. We want to consider the value of the 3 presences in different contexts. Okay, I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible. And so there's an activity. So on the next slide, there's going to be 3, I won't call them definitions, they're descriptions, thoughts, phrases, words. And what I'd like you to do is read what's written under one of the headings, and with 1 or 2 people around you, or if you're live streaming on your own, or maybe you're live streaming with someone else, think about, do you agree with what is written about that presence? How would you define the presence you have chosen? And write your definition down. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do that. Either on your own or with someone next to you, 3 people with you. Choose one of the headings. Read what's there. Do you agree with it? Summarize it. Define your own, what you've chosen, and write it down. Cue music.
Showing what people are seeing, so that other people are seeing the powerful.
How do you see your comments? No, I don't know anyone comments it just because she wants to. But she needs to see it. After this is, yeah. This is a bit tricky.
So, let me show what I can do.
I wonder if we can get an indication in the live stream chat if people are able to see the...
They are.
They are.
They are.
Thank you. And so if you're in the live stream, perhaps you would want to write your own definition in the chat so that other people can see it.
No, it was just the double swing. I don't know what made me think, let me go and check. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm getting old. Thank you.
See the screen. But at the same time,
So just a reminder of the activity. Read through one of those headings. Do you agree with it? Think about it. Chat about it. Write down your own definition. If you've chosen social presence, write down what you think social presence means. If you've chosen teacher presence, what do you think teacher presence means? And if you've chosen cognitive presence, what do you think cognitive presence means? And so if you're in the live stream, you're doing the same activity. And I'll give you 3 more minutes. So you should be trying to write something down at this point if you've finished reading and discussing. You can write down what you've agreed between you, or you can work on your own. A reminder, if you'd like to write your definition in the chat, if you're live streaming, you can do that. Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm going to try and interrupt you. Our next challenge is how to get to hear you all. So I'd like to know if anyone would like to volunteer what you wrote down for social presence. Anyone interested in sharing? Yes, at the back. You can come forward or maybe you can shout. All right, can we listen? Pay attention.
So the two of us were together. We looked at the divisions here and we agreed with everything. We just added something. We said for us, social presence is also about embracing the differences between us and our students, accommodating and understanding those differences. Whether it's race, culture, religion, any difference, also embracing that within the social presence for the students. And then we looked at the definition.
Thank you. So perhaps, okay. So just perhaps for those people who might not be able to hear you because they're online.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
Should I repeat
They were agreeing with what's written as social presence, but they wanted to add the idea of embracing difference, understanding difference, and being different. Thank you.
Is that to be present in every moment of the student's life. Whether it's when you're assessing them, when they're in the classroom, online, face-to-face, when they're at home, you need to be present with them as a human being. That when they think of you in a way that it's not just in the classroom setting. And for us, that would be the social presence of a teacher.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So social presence of a teacher means being present, but being present in a social way. So whether you're teaching, whether they're at home, online, however you can find ways to be present. A question I have is it only
Okay, so on social presence, we added connectedness between lecturers and students, which we agree with the first statement there about the dangers of distance education, where we say it could, the inability for either the lecturer or the student, or mainly lies with the lecturer, where the lecturer is maybe not well equipped on how to create a safe space which encourages engagement. So if you just come and then you teach and you don't have activities that probe engagement from the students, then there can be disjuncture between the lecturers and students. So what we are adding in social presence is the connectedness between lecturers and students.
Thank you very much. So it's about connectedness, and you're starting to say it's not just about social connectedness, it's about something else too. Maybe we'll get there. Is there anything in the chat that we need to say? Not yet. All right, we're still talking a little bit about the teacher. Who else needs to be connected? Let's go there.
Good morning, everyone. So my colleague Sonia and I were talking about social presence as well, and it is the teacher, it's students, and it's between those two, but it's also between students and students. So one of the things we talked about, and we actually pinned it as our definition, is communally making the intangible alive. And that could be talking about bringing out the difference in the class. It could be bringing out some of those intangible understandings that become clearer as you start to talk among yourselves about different things. But there's a bit of an intangibility there that we feel needs to be made alive by virtue of who's in the space.
Great, thanks very much. So it's about helping the presence of everyone online to come alive, taking into account all the differences, all the connectedness, and the roles that everyone is playing within that space to keep connected, to be communally alive. Lovely. All right, I want to move on a little bit. Did anyone choose teacher presence? No? Yes. Would you like to talk to us?
Maybe I'll just... Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So we looked at what is already there, and we looked at what characterizes this teacher presence. So amongst what we have there on your slide, we said maybe we need to include or exercise more flexibility and compassion. And we wrote there, compassion is like it goes on. There's fluidity of that. Because the online learning environment can be an isolated space, inhumane, it's cold. But if we stretch ourselves as nurturers, being it women academics or male academics, like the previous speaker has shared with us, because the presentation was very intriguing and it was igniting more of that Ubuntu and that element of reaching out to our students and to our colleagues, because sometimes we feel isolated ourselves as colleagues. So sometimes the drive of student online learning support is more magnified, but sometimes we forget ourselves as peers within the academic space. Thank you.
So I hear you starting to make a connection between social presence and teacher presence. So the flexibility, I think you used the word compassion.
Yes.
And so we're starting to say, well, what is teaching, what is social? And how do we tell the difference? Are they both important? Any other comments on that at the back? Yeah.
Okay. We looked at the teaching methodologies and especially blending the different methodologies that we have. So in the sense, we focus more on the social presence, but it feeds into the teaching methodologies that we had to adopt and adapt to during the pandemic. And that is your two-way interactive communication and your systems, because there's a lot of socioeconomic factors, looking at your learning spaces, looking at non-participative students. So having that interactive learning and teaching experience where you use Jamboards, you use different, when you go online, different materials that you can use to draw the students in, instead of having that one way or recording of your slides, but looking at the different teaching methodologies, and then either have a blended approach in them.
Great, thank you. So what you're doing for us is connecting social presence with a teaching methodology to try and bridge the two. That a more interactive methodology will lead to more of a social connectedness, but you have a role as a teacher in that methodology of engaging students. The conversations they have are not necessarily only about the problems they're having at home or the challenges they're having with online. They're also about the content of what you're teaching, because we learn from each other, social learning. Okay, thank you, that was helpful. I need to move on, sorry, I'm under pressure. Cognitive presence, anyone pick that? Anyone online want to have a stab at it? Cognitive presence, how is it different from teacher presence or social presence? Let's try. Thank you.
Morning, colleagues. I'm Nobutula from the University of the Free State. So on the cognitive presence, it was a standalone in the sense that whatever we highlighted with the teacher as well as the social kind of encapsulate the cognitive without it being highlighted, so to speak. So what I saw, if I were to go back just a bit to teacher, the list was long compared to social and cognitive. 6 bullets versus 4 bullets and 3 bullets, which also highlighted that we tend to put so much on the teachers, and we also forget the students. So what we also highlighted there is if we were to shorten the teachers list and also just bring in the other party in place, which is the students, for a collaborative relationship to happen, because we tend to think as teachers, we already come with a cognitive presence. Meaning those 1, 2, 3, 4 bullets also joins the 6 bullets. So we actually have 10 bullets. So if we then to half the 10 bullets and give it to the students and create a platform where we can collaborate, then yes, I think, because we tend to think we have all the answers, but nah, we don't,
Right.
So we need to give it back to the students, and they will also help us to have harmony within these settings.
Right.
Thank you.
Wonderful contribution. Thank you. Would you like to add something?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So on our side, if I look at the cognitive presence, especially speaking to just the critically thinking, reflecting, constructing new knowledge, we had a very big problem with the teacher presence and that word influence. And speaking to how we can reduce those bullet points around the teacher presence and just increase a bit more activity on the cognitive.
Yes.
For us, I think the word influence should very much be replaced by facilitating content, the direction, the thought of learners, versus just pushing the agenda of the teacher. And that way, with the cognitive presence, we enable that process of thinking critically, reflecting, and forming new knowledge amongst learners and making it a collaborative process.
Great, thank you. Really two related contributions, I think, but also related to the methodology idea. Because how do you do that? What do you do differently from just recording yourself and putting it online and telling content? One of the suggestions was you engage in activity-based learning, because activity-based learning gives students something to do. How you design that activity-based learning has to take account of what conditions are you creating for mental action, and what is your role and what is the student's role. Of course you have an agenda, but how do the students contribute to that agenda, and how do you encourage them to do that? I would imagine it's largely through the kinds of questions that you ask, the kinds of tasks you ask them to do. And we'll come back to this a little bit later and see whether we can find other ways to do that too. Okay. Thank you. That was a lovely conversation. Anything in the chat? Is it possible to view the PowerPoint presentation as the speaker progresses? Are they not seeing the PowerPoint presentation? They are. Okay. Thank you. All right. I think, did we post the document in the chat before we started? Are the online people able to click on the document and download it? Do we know that? Ancilla? Are the students able to download the document from the chat? Was it pasted in the chat?
Did you pay something?
I think Celine said she did.
Oh, it was shared.
Okay, so for those people live streaming, if you go back up in the chat, you should see the document itself, a PDF version. If you download that, you might find it a little easier to read rather than reading the presentation on the screen. And that's important for the next thing that we want to do. I've put together a very short little, it's not even a case study, it's a vignette, it's a little story. Okay, let me go back here. So now that you've had a conversation, we've had a conversation about social presence, teacher presence, cognitive presence, go back to what you wrote down and reflect on it. Do you want to change it somehow? That's also part of the learning. And so we're going to talk a little about someone called Professor Garner. And I'd like you to take some time to read it, highlight or underline or write down words or phrases which for you indicate her facilitating, mediating, influencing social teacher or cognitive presence. Read it to yourself if you like. You might want to read it aloud to each other if that's how you hear better. I've tried to make it as short as possible. So take 2 or 3 minutes to read, 5 minutes to read through. While you're reading, write down words that for you illustrate social presence, teacher presence, cognitive presence, either in what Professor Garner is doing or in what her students are doing. So now I think the live streaming students are seeing it bigger, which is good. So perhaps after 60 seconds or so we can move to the next screen. Oh, good. At least one person in the live stream managed to download the PDF. I can see it better than I thought. Yeah, thanks. Perhaps we can move the live stream version to the next slide. Can we move to the next slide? Thanks. Oh, I can do it. I forgot I've got a clicker. I do have some control. That's very interesting because I've just written notes on my own thing here about what level of control does the teacher need? And I was feeling like I don't have quite enough control, but actually I do. By the way, I think the teacher should try and let go of control. So there we go. I wonder if I'm moving on too fast, but I think you can carry on thinking while we move on. And so, really what I'd like us to think about, what is the role of the teacher and what is the role of the student in creating, in contributing to each of those presences. So what I think is that Prof. Garner supported her students in different ways to get access, to navigate, and to build a learning community. And that was her role in creating a social presence. I think she facilitated a range of activities, she summarized content, and she encouraged critical thinking by asking questions. And I think that played a role in contributing to a teacher presence. I think she created opportunities for students to engage meaningfully, supporting them to think more deeply, not just at the surface, and productively. And I think that's how she contributed to a cognitive presence. You may have thought differently. You may have thought there were things she could have done differently or better, and that's great if you thought that. I would like to, so actually it was through her facilitation skills that she was able to contribute to each of those three presences. I'd like to think a little more carefully about, what is the student's role? I think we've spoken quite a lot about the teacher's role. What is the student's role? If we're not wanting to influence too much or control too much, what role do we give the students in creating those three presences? Do you want to think about that for a minute, and then we can hear some contributions? Or if you'd like to write something in the chat. What is students' role in contributing to a social presence, a teacher presence? Can students contribute to a teacher presence and a cognitive presence? I'll give you a minute or two more, and then if you'd like to contribute to one of those three questions. And just a reminder, I see some of you are talking to each other, and some of you are working individually. That's good. I know if it was me, I would be having to challenge myself to move beyond myself and work with someone else, because I don't enjoy working in groups, really. So I'm more of an individual, but challenge yourself. Chat to someone next to you. You might learn something. And if you're online, write something in the chat. Okay, so let's hear some responses. What is the student's role in contributing to a social presence? Anyone like to offer? What do we want students to do in order to contribute to a social presence? Actively participate. Fair enough. Can't have a social presence if there isn't participation. Any others? At the back?
The fact, this is based on a scenario, which is the fact that they are in a group, in a WhatsApp group.
Okay.
They all have a community.
Go to the mic so the online people can hear.
Okay, I can also interpret for her. Yeah. So the suggestion is the WhatsApp group in the little vignette was supporting social presence. It still depends on students participating in the WhatsApp group, but the WhatsApp group hopefully can facilitate that. It gives an opportunity for social presence. Yeah, anything else? Thanks.
What me and Zintle now discussed based on the scenario that was given, and that is what we struggle with from both implementing first year orientation and from academic. Sometimes our groups are big. So what she did as a strategy is to break them up into smaller bits, smaller groups, and then bringing that teaching methodologies back in again, where the students within their small groups were then in control with setting up group norms, setting up feedback, having discussions, and her as the teacher summarizing and giving it back one feedback to all the different smaller groups. So, and by breaking your bigger group up, you actually have more control of your class, because sometimes you lose 30, 40, 50% if the group is too big.
Yeah. So that is a strategy. So the smaller the groups, maybe the easier it is for students to participate. It might be because it's less intimidating. I know from anecdotal evidence that those WhatsApp groups can be really hard to manage. And so you have to think about that. But maybe smaller groups are easier to manage. But as you say, it comes back to the teacher's role and the student's role. What level of control do you need? How much can you give first year students? It might be a completely new experience for them. And you might need to support them more than you would need to support a third year student, a group of third year students. Okay, thanks. Teacher presence. Can students teach? How do we help support students, expect students to contribute to a teacher presence? You build on knowledge they already have. Acknowledge what we already know. That's how we learn.
So I think one of the things that's critical, perhaps not mutually exclusive to those three categories, but cuts across, is how you shape the space. And what I mean by that is, so we had the example in the vignette here where Prof. Garner encouraged students to come up with sort of your terms of reference, if you will, for how the space is and what the space needs to look like. But I think what's equally important, especially when we are doing either fully online or hybrid, but it is equally applicable to in-person teaching, is allowing the space for vulnerability and allowing the space for mistakes. Because I think unless you set that up as part of your ground rules for your presence and your interaction with students, that can be very overwhelming, or I'm trying to get to a word and can't. You see, I'm making a mistake here. You need to create a safe, authentic and genuine safe space where if students or teachers, because we don't know everything, don't know the answer to something or can't articulate a question properly, that there's comfort in that and there's learning in that. And I think that's critical, probably for all three spaces, not just for teacher.
Thank you. And so it also brings up the question of what is the role of the teacher and what is the role of the students if and when conflict arises. There was a hand? Yeah.
Yes. So as a rider to the previous contribution about creating a safe space, I would say that this also cuts across the different presences. That the teacher would have to allow the students to contribute to discussions from their own perspective, from their own context. Because they will be bringing their cultural capital, which not everybody may be familiar with. And all of that will then, have implications for social presence. It will have implications for teacher presence, because the teacher may also learn something new from, hearing a different perspective, and may have to incorporate that into their teaching.
Thank you. We're starting to see quite a strong relationship between the three presences. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that also we need to monitor because of the rise in cyberbullying. So because on the WhatsApp groups, we also need to teach students about etiquette on WhatsApp groups, and that as much as they are for social learning, they're not for social chit-chat, if you know what I mean, and that everybody's opinion is respected, and that even if you don't agree with someone's opinion, you don't send rude emojis or make rude comments, that's not appropriate. So because there's such a rise in cyberbullying, Prof. Garner would need to monitor the situation very carefully.
Thank you. So we're also starting to see that role of facilitating, mediating conflict. Do you step in? When do you step in? Is it your problem? Is it students' problem? Do you help them to try and solve those issues? Because unless you do, it's going to get in the way of learning. Okay, what about cognitive presence? Students' role in cognitive presence. What did we say about cognitive presence? Thinking deeply, thinking critically. No? Have we? Yes. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Buleng from the University of the Free State. With cognitive presence, it ties in with the social presence and the teacher presence. Because in the absence of social presence and teacher presence, then there is no cognitive presence. Because number one, the students need to be part of the groups, they need to be part of the learning, they need to also be involved in their own learning and not just rely on the teacher. Because with the WhatsApp groups, from personal experience, I found that the teaching is not just done by the facilitator, but also by the students themselves through peer learning, because learning is a social construct. And the teacher might see it another way, and you find that the students themselves also have a way that even enlightens the teacher. And by engaging in this, then they're cognitively there, they're mentally present in the groups, and the learning becomes more interesting. And if they're interested in what they're learning, then they're cognitively there, and the cognitive presence then feeds off from the social and the teacher presence. Because again, if they feel that the safe spaces, as the other colleagues have said, is created in those environments and in those groups, then they are again inspired to be part of the group and to learn and engage mentally.
And I think it's also about, in a way, especially first year students might not be used to this idea that actually I have some agency here. And you might need to encourage them to think for themselves and to think about not just what I've learned, but how am I learning? I'm learning by engaging with questions. I'm learning by listening to other people, not just the teacher. I'm learning by thinking about what I'm learning. And that might be very new to first-year students. And so your role may be to make it explicit. This is what we're doing here. It's a new way of learning for you. This is how we're going to do it going forward. Let's do it together. Let's think about, how am I benefiting from this way of learning? How am I learning about my own learning? Okay. And that ties, I think, to the point about too many bullets, or how to share out the bullets. That there is a strong overlap between teacher and cognitive presence. And I think part of the reason why there's this relationship between the three presences is because we're not just talking about the teacher. We're also talking about the student. Okay. Now, I've got another little task for you. Am I keeping you too busy? I would like you to write 2 or 3 sentences to summarize what you have learned to this point. What have you learned so far about the 3 presences? A summary, not an essay, a summary. 2 or 3 sentences. What have you learned so far about the 3 presences? It could be your own individual summary. It could be a collective summary. If you're online, write your summary in your chat. It might be really helpful for some people who've come in, live streamed a little bit late. Put your summary there. It might help them to catch up. Or maybe someone will disagree with your summary, and it'll inspire them to think of their own summary. Okay, so think about, what do you learn in this context of a conference workshop? What do you learn from writing a summary? Writing your own summary? As a teacher, what would you learn from writing a summary for your students? Then go back to the feedback summary on Prof. Garner that I wrote. That was my summary. What do you learn from reading my summary? And what do you learn from comparing the two? So essentially I'm asking, would it be valuable for students to write their own summaries? What do they learn from that? What would you learn as a teacher from their summaries? What do they learn from your summaries? What do you learn from your summaries? Does anyone want to make a contribution to those questions? Either in the chat or verbally. The value of summaries. What do we learn from them? Yes. Puleng.
Thank you. Summaries are a useful tool for reflection, because as you're summarizing, you get to focus your thoughts, because, I mean, with the story, the vignette was very long compared to the summary where it's straight to the point and, you know, without losing meaning of what's in the bigger picture. So summary is a wonderful tool for reflection, and it also shows you that the coin is not just one-sided or two-sided, but there are other sides, because you also get to see the summaries that people have, you know, other people have written, like the summary that you have. Yes, there's nothing wrong with it, it's absolutely beautiful and correct, but there are also parts that you're not covering that I saw and I picked from the anecdote. So summaries are also a tool for learning, not just for the student, but also as you're writing your own summary, then you got to reflect on your own thinking and your own thoughts, and even in some instances, construct them in a better and more meaningful and impactful way compared to the first time that you wrote something or did your slides.
Thank you. So they're valuable for reflecting, they're valuable for focusing your thinking. I think there was someone there in front. And then I'll come to you.
Can you hear me? Oh, that one. I was actually going to say more or less the same thing that my colleague has mentioned here. So far as the value of summaries is concerned, is that's when you get to realize and see that, you know, while we're listening to the same thing or reading the same thing, but different people may construct different meanings and interpretations of that. And at the end of the summarization process, when you compare those notes, then we get into further learning about those things.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. I was going to add on what they've already said. Part of what I wanted to say has been said, but I was going to say as well, summaries are good for me as a teacher to find out whether my students are understanding what we're dealing with, and it gives me an opportunity to do some formative assessment of some kind. As I give them feedback, it's for the development of the students as well in the process.
Thank you. Assessment. Okay. So we're starting to even think about, are we teaching, are we learning, are we assessing, what are we doing here? Actually what we're trying to do is get students to think and learn. Okay. We can construct it in all sorts of different ways, whatever suits our purpose. but we're learning from it and with it. Okay. So now I'm going forward again. Weaving. I guess some of you have heard of the idea of weaving, the concept of weaving. It's a process where a facilitator identifies themes, makes connections that are not obvious, draws out an implication, or makes an observation, and invites students to answer new questions and make comments. It's related to the idea of summaries, because from the summaries, as you've said, we'll see that there are different ideas, different perspectives, and in order to help students to think more deeply, more critically, we might want to pick up this idea that came from that summary there. That was an interesting idea. It's not on my agenda, but it's an interesting thought. Let me ask it and see what happens. Or a student might ask a question and you want to pursue it because it's linked to something somewhere else in the curriculum, and you're trying to make those links. Think about that for a minute. And then think about a question or two that you want to ask of us here to extend our thinking. Think something we haven't touched on yet, or something that's been bothering you. Turn it into a question. Or you want to make a link to something you heard in a previous presentation this morning. Or something of your own experience, you want to link it. Ask a question. What kind of question would you ask? It might be related directly to the summary you've just written. Keep it focused on the three presences. But something deeper, something else, extended. I think we're not quite inspiring our live stream audience. They're not posting in the chat. Something I'm not doing right. But I hope it's still useful for you, even though you are live streaming. Maybe now you have settled in and you're able to post a question in the chat. Find a thread to weave into the summary, out of the summary, between the summaries. All right, would anyone like to share a question that you've thought of? Yes.
Thank you. Mine is going to be linked to the presentation that was done before. I've written here, could we say the same to our female students being affected in a similar way as our academics, in the sense that it affects their social cognitive presence?
What affects their social cognitive presence?
I am saying the responsibilities that they have as female students in the home or whatever situation they are in. Does it affect their presence as students?
Wonderful question. Does being a woman student online and the responsibilities that come with being a woman affect your ability to be present, socially, cognitively, and as a teacher? Lovely question. Another question? Oh, sorry. Yes, yeah?
We were discussing amongst the three presents whether is it possible that there can be an environmental or structural or online tool kind of presence. If we are working within an environment that is online, can there be an environmental presence as the fourth presence?
Okay.
Will the environment or the tool that you are using to engage be another enabler or constraining to the fourth presence?
Right.
So then we talk about an environment or...
Yes. I understand your question.
I just don't have the exact word
Yes.
for the structural presence. Maybe.
I think I understand your question, which is if you are online, do we have to do something differently to support that presence than if we were face to face? Great question. Thank you. There's another one here.
Yeah, that actually links to what I wanted to say is how explicit do we make it to students what their roles are concerning the various presences?
Yeah, also lovely. Do we make it explicit? Or is it one of those hidden agendas? At the back?
Okay. While we're talking about the presences that the students have, are supposed to, and the teachers and the students are supposed to be engaged in, are we thinking about the emotional readiness of the first year student and also the tech savviness? Because they could want to be cognitively, socially present and, in the role of a teacher, but emotionally they're not ready because of the environment and other external factors that have an impact of their presence. And also just a simple thing with the technologies that we're using. Do they have access to those technologies? Are they fluent with those technologies? Are we considering all these when we're looking at the presences?
Wonderful. What is it for a first year student? And how do we support them? What is our role to support them? Thanks.
So there are 4 questions here.
There are 4 questions here. Let's take 4 questions here.
There's
1,
one
2, 3,
here.
4. Oh yes, actually I did see you. I'm sorry. Can we hold these 4 and take it right at the back? Then we'll go 4 and then we'll come to you.
I just want to, on the first question with regards to digital literacies, and that's the thing, not only just digital literacies, it's digital technology literacies, both from the lecturer and the students. Because during COVID, we actually realized that's in a higher education environment, were also lacking digital knowledge. Playing around, learning about Teams, learning about Zoom, learning about breakaway rooms. And so how do you expect a student when you as an academic or as a past staff member still need to adapt and adopt to the current technologies available out there? Because there's quite a broad interactive technologies that you can use, your Jamboards, your all the different technologies, but are we using that? And are we upskilling ourselves? Because we actually teach with the basics that we know, and we are disabling or disability, what's the correct word? The student, because of our own disability.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So now what I'd like to say, I want to take those 4 and this one, and we're segueing very nicely into a general discussion. So if you've got a question that you've weaved, let's hear it, but maybe there's also some answers you'd like to try and give. So let's have a conversation for the next 5 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you. Morning everyone, it's Onke from Watatisul. One of the discussions that we have then about the student role on those themes that we have. One issue that came up then is the issue of then the etiquette. We know how the student behaves then on the social media, of which unfortunately now we have then to use the same social media then for learning and teaching. Now we tend then to see that the student then they don't differentiate, but okay, now we are using the very same social media then for the learning. Now then for our social, even that the way they address you as a lecturer, then you find them say hi, and you felt, how I wish then we can explain this, but no, you can't be so casual then when you address me. So I tend then to ask, okay, now what could be the effective way that we can use to promote Disney critics to our students. In our case, we do include them in the student module guide, but I felt that the students they don't pay attention to that. Or probably I want to challenge our engineers to come up with a social media for learning and social media for social. I don't know.
Okay. What that makes me think of is we might be challenged in a number of ways. What's wrong with a student saying hi?
Okay.
Second question.
Okay, so thanks. Mine's not a question as much as it's a comment.
Thanks.
I'm Willie from UKZN. Since this morning, there's been a pretty heavy emphasis on the whole academia and the academic impact on our students in terms of the first year concept. I'm from Student Support Services, and many of my colleagues here are as well. And our focus is based mainly on adjustment, transition, in the impact of the teaching and learning on a first year student. So I wanted to say that with us, I think in those 2 years, we really became pretty much experts in all three of these aspects that we have talked about, because it's become our core business. Our business was to understand the impact that online learning had on our students. And so therefore our focus is somewhat different. And I think it's obviously not just to teach our students. For us, it's about learning. It's about learning what impacts on our students' learning. And therefore, I think for a long time, academia and support stood apart. And support is, we've often heard, is on the periphery of the university's core functions and business. And I think if anything comes out of online or blended and going forward through COVID, it must be that we need to work together, because support really structures and fully understands what our students' lived experiences are, which stands outside of going into a classroom and wanting to impart knowledge. So that was just a comment I wanted to share with you. And thank you.
Thank you.
We also have an online comment as well, Sheila.
Sorry? We do have an online comment. Yay! Would you like to read it? Oh, all right, let me go closer. How do we also support first-year students with different disabilities in digital spaces? Thank you for that question. If you have a comment, you can also put the comment in the chat. If you want to respond to that question, others might also want to. Thank you. Next.
Okay. My question is, how do we balance or ensure that all these presences are visible in a setup which is like the one that we have? This one is more controlled because we are all academics here. But in a setup where you have students in class and you have other students joining you online and you are standing there teaching, how do you ensure as the lecturer that you do not only focus on the ones that are here in class with you, but you also, those that are listening online are not just passively there and you are not even sure whether they are still listening or not. So how do we balance in a case, I think it follows up with the new normal, where we are integrating the face-to-face and the online. So you need to be accommodative of students who may say, I won't be able to make it to class, and then you have a setting of this nature. How do you then ensure that you are present in both environments?
Yeah, and I can tell you from experience, it's not easy. I've been ignoring the chat. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next question.
I think my question was asked by the online person. I wanted to raise that we've been focusing more on mainstream students and we are silent about disabled students. Do these three presents, are they inclusive of disabled students as well? We read Prof. Ghana's reading what, They were talking about WhatsApp groups and all that, breakaway groups. What if I'm blind and I can't be part of a WhatsApp group? What about me? So how is my presence considered? So I think we need to address that as well.
Thank you. It's a wonderful thing, because present doesn't mean only physically present. It also doesn't mean only virtually present.
We have one question.
Right, yes. We've taken a while to come to the front. Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to say as well, or add to it, that with what happened during COVID and post-COVID, I think we're going to adopt various new pedagogies as well. I'm thinking about team teaching, for instance, to address what the lady said over there when it comes to if we do hybrid teaching. And yeah, I think a lot of changes is going to come from this. Something else about the disabilities as well is the online environment actually provides us a brilliant opportunity to be more inclusive in the way that we present our information. So when a student actually registers with the student disability unit, and the lecturer is made aware of it, we've got just so more options to actually support those students with learning content.
Okay, wonderful. We just have to think about it, right? We have to stop and think about that. It won't happen by itself. We have to design it into our teaching and learning. Question at the front here, yes.
Right. Part of what I wanted to say has already been covered, but I would want to add a little bit and say, in terms of the questions that we would be asking ourselves, one important question for me would be, how do the changing demographics, the student profile, affect the three different presences that we were referring to? Because I think for a lecturer, it would be important to keep abreast of that data so that they can do something about it. In fact, the issue of disabilities was one thing that I wanted to refer to regarding the profile.
Thank you. I think we'll have a last question or comment.
Pick me, please pick me.
I did see your hand.
I can answer your question as I have a disability. I am visually impaired and I do a lot of online work. And I actually, when you said this earlier, you said, I'm hoping to be inclusive of everybody in this workshop. I thought to myself, let's see how inclusive she is. Sorry, the evil in me came out.
That's okay.
And then she said, I've got a slide here, read the definitions. And I thought, oh, she's doomed. She's doomed.
She's doomed.
But anyway, so with online, technology has advanced amazingly. There are screen readers, you can use an iPhone or an Android, or you can use, there's open source software. But also depends on the lecturer. For example, if you are screen sharing a PowerPoint, can't read it.
Can't read it. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I'm used to it.
What could I have done differently?
You could have read out the definitions.
Thank you.
No.
No, it's true.
I think, the fact that you allowed us to work in pairs sort of saved you. So I was able to work with my colleagues, so you have redeemed yourself somewhat. So basically, I think what you have to do with disabled students, one thing, never assume.
Yeah.
Because we all have different needs. And I'm going to give you an example. Sorry, I'm speaking from visually impaired because that's what I know. You assume that someone who's blind from birth and someone who went blind is the same. No, we are not. People who have gone blind have a visual memory. Someone who's like me, who was born blind, has no visual memory. So you say to me, in a lecture, I want you to visualize a sunset. They're going, okay, you know, I'm going, sun's in my eyes, it hurts, I don't like it, I don't want to, I don't understand, what are you talking about? And then, or someone will say, I want you to look at this diagram, and then they'll try and explain it, and my mind just goes, because I can't follow what you're saying, and I don't understand what you're saying. So, never ever assume that just because you had a blind student last year, they're going to need this person this year is going to need the same level of support. You need to ask, what is it that you need? How can I help you with what you specifically need? I'm going to shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm now going to read out some final questions for us to think about, coming back to the challenge I set for us in the beginning. So my challenge, to what extent did I succeed in creating one or more presences in this workshop? Are the 3 presences only valuable in online facilitation? Is it possible and desirable to create a social presence, a teacher presence, and a cognitive presence in face-to-face as well as remote or online contexts, and blended ones like this, or differently blended ones? Because blend means literally that, a blend. Okay. Your challenge. What did you learn? How will you apply what you learned? What will you do differently from what you experienced here? I have learned an enormous amount, and I'm really, really grateful for your participation. I think we've had a wonderful conversation. I think it could go further. I think it should go further. I wanted just to share, I do hope, it seems like maybe there was one advantage, only one, to being online in this session, which is that you got a digital copy of the PDF. I don't know if the others of you have received one or if you can receive one. Can they, Celine? Yeah. And so I hope you do get a digital one. If you don't, and if you're interested in thinking some more about this, exploring the ideas a little bit more, there is an online free, what we've called a learning pathway on facilitating online learning, and you're free to go there, do it, share it, adapt it, whatever you like with it. Thank you.